it's self-explanatory for the code. With that being said, I'll kind of talk a bit about it and what it all entails, and then we'll kind of talk about some other things as well. So I'm going to go into the lecture 2 notes. So last class we covered handling events and managing state. So if you missed last class, I'd encourage you to read over this documentation as well as watch the video. Like I said, it's pretty straightforward. This is also kind of talking about a bit more about state, a bit more involved, talking about how you can pass it down to components through properties, which we also covered last class. So we're going to be talking mainly about React Router today and how you can navigate your page through different UIs and sharing data across your routes. So I'm not really going to be following this lecture notes necessarily. I'm going to be using my recipe tracking app as more of a demo, but I encourage you all to read over this notes as well to kind of get an idea for how it all works, because these notes are more aligned with the full stack application app that was built for this class. So this entire demo here. So if you want to follow along with that and go over the notes along with this, you can do that in your own time, but just make sure you check out the full stack demo module 2 branch here. And then from there, you can kind of go through the app and kind of investigate it as I kind of mentioned here, just by clicking through this. But I'll talk about this a bit about this, and then we'll kind of talk about the recipe tracking app and then go into the other bits. So React Router, it adds routes, as it kind of implies, to your page. So mainly, the 2 files that are mainly going to be changing is your main TSX and your app TSX. So in main TSX, you can see now we've added a browser router tag now right above the app level. And what that does is it allows routing for child components, as this comment mentions. So now if we go to app TSX and see what that's now doing, now app TSX looks a lot different now. You can see we have a routes kind of parent tag in there, and then under that we have a route index. So this right here is saying this is going to be under this path, render this layout. And I'll talk about that layout in a second. And then from there, under that one, there is a index route. And this index route is going to be the one that always routes when you go to the /UI. I have this similar setup on mine as well, so I'll kind of go to my recipe tracking app and talk about this. But if you want to follow through the notes, I'd encourage you all to follow through the notes and read over this app TSX stuff as well. Let me just pull up my recipe tracking app because I did something similar on mine as well. So here's my main TSX. I forgot to add the strict mode here, but it doesn't really matter. Add that back. All right, so my main TSX just has a browser router wrapping the app. Now if I go back to app TSX, this is kind of where the main logic is. So you can see I have the routes kind of prefixed for the lowest level. And from there, I have my main route, which is my /routes. This is the home route I'm going to be going to. And then from there, I have a layout. So what this layout is doing is it's a defined component I made. So if I go to my components here and go to the layout folder I have set up, you can see now that I have my footer, my nav bar, and a layout component all inside this. So I've moved some of my components around to align with this new requirement, just because when you're doing layout stuff, your footer and your nav bar are always in the layout. You're not going to have a footer and nav bar because you're not going to footer and nav bar each individual component. So I have all these pages set up here, but I don't have my nav bar and footer defined in these. I'm just calling like this. And the reason for that is in your layout file, you actually can define an outlet for the router. So what an outlet is it's pretty much saying that when you go to route to one of these pages, it's going to route your UI under this outlet, and then this content around it will always be loaded. So the footer and the nav bar will always be loaded, while the main outlet here is going to be what's changing each time you load up a new page using React Router. So that's why I have this layout one here for my element and my root, because this is saying when you go to any path under this section here, load this layout first as the main path. And then from there, I have some additional paths under it. So I've got my index route here, which was my landing page. And my landing page is just a very simple kind of welcome login sign up kind of thing. And then from there, I have it so there's a path to recipes, and there's child paths under that one. There's an index path, which will load up all the recipes, and there's a path that can load up your individual recipes. And then from there, I have a not found route, which is just passing in the star for the path. So what star does is it pretty much says anything, any route will match to the star. So if I have any route that is not in any of these routes defined up above, it's going to go into my not found path and return my not found component here. And I'll show all that in just a second on kind of a demo. There is documentation for all of this on React Router's page, and my Teams is blocking the top bar here. But here you go. So under React Router, there's a getting started kind of installation bit here. I believe we're using the declarative mode. There are different modes you can use in React Router for how you declare your routes. So you can route like this, which is how I'm doing it in my app and how we're doing it in the demo app. You can also do it where you're defining all your routes above it and just passing that into a route provider. These all work the same way. They're just a different way of defining it out. And then lastly, you also can do it using the framework mode, which is a bit of a different way as well. For our purposes of our class, we're going to be using the declarative mode. If you use another mode, I'm not going to take off marks, but I'd encourage you to use the declarative mode just because that's what all the documentation we're using in this class follows. But if you want to use another mode, just keep in mind the documentation I'm using and the kind of apps we've been using as references might not align with how you're doing it. So I'd encourage you to use the declarative mode just to kind of align yourself with the class and make sure we're kind of all in the same way of doing it. But you're welcome to do any other way you want. Just keep in mind you take responsibility for doing it that way. So yeah. So as I mentioned, here's kind of my new app now with the router implemented. So I'm on my main route here. You can see I have my navbar and my footer here, and that's part of the layout file. So if I go back to that layout file just to kind of show that again, my layout file has a navbar and a footer defined in it. And then from there, I have an outlet. So the outlet is everything inside the main tag here is being rendered under the outlet. So if I go to my kind of code here through the console and just kind of hover around, you can see here, this is my outlet right here. This entire section is my router outlet. So if I switch pages, for example, if I go to recipes, now you can see it's loading up all my recipes in the outlet, right? So everything's inside, everything being loaded in is inside the outlet, no matter what. So my navbar and my footer never change. If I scroll the way down, my footer is still there. My footer is always going to be there. So that's kind of why you want to have a layout file. The layout file will set this up so you can always have your navbar and your footer, and then from there you just have the outlet changing out each time you load up a new page. So if I go to my recipes and my landing page, actually, just to kind of show what that looks like, my landing page is pretty simple. It's my main kind of /UI. So if I go back to just the regular path here, here's my landing page. So you can see here in my, I'm going to close this console. You can see here inside my landing page, I have a welcome to recipe tracker, and then I have a link to the login where you can log in, or it's linked to sign up. Now, if you kind of noticed in my app TSX, I don't have those paths defined. I don't have a login or a sign up path defined. So what's going to happen is when I click those paths, it's actually going to go to my not found tag here, and it's going to load up my not found UI. So if I click one of these, whoops, this page is not found, right? So I can type in any page in here. If I just go and whatever, right? It's always going to bring up my not found page because that's the default page. If I didn't have a not found page, it would give me an error message. So you pretty much always want a not found page just to kind of ensure you don't get those error messages. So if I reload my page now and just add a random route, I'm going to get nothing here. And I believe my console might have an error in it. So yeah, you get a no routes matched for location. So you don't really get a very descriptive error message. But if you're a user on the page and you're trying to access a website or a URL, then you might want to include a not found just to kind of make sure it's a bit more user friendly. So that's how that kind of not found bit works. Now, there's some kind of weird things I'm doing here with the layout. So I mentioned in the layout, I have my navbar in here, and I'm still having my navbar so I can sign in and sign out, right? So the way that's working now is I'm actually making it so my app TSX component is handling all of that. So I've moved the on login and set login functions to my app TSX instead of my navbar. And from there, I've actually been passing that down to my layout through properties. So those same properties I'm using of my navbar, I pretty much metered on my layout here, and I'm passing those into my navbar from the parent. So it's kind of standard how everything works in most modern day frameworks. Everything gets passed down from a parent to a child, and then back to the parent to the parent. So you can see if I pass in my is logged in variable here using my use state, logged in goes into the is logged in the layout, and then the layout has an is logged in here, which is going to my navbar, which also has an is logged in. And from there, I'm using that is logged in to determine whether or not to show the save recipes button, which is your my recipes. And then from there, when you click the login button, it fires off the on login event, which is this being passed in here, which is in my layout, which is also being passed into my app TSX, which goes in here. So it's a lot of passing stuff between components, especially callbacks and variables. So you have to get familiar with that. And it's just kind of a very similar pattern that you use a lot in React. So I'd recommend, if you're not familiar with how that works, please look into that and kind of get an idea for how that works and reach out if you have any questions about that. But you can see as well, my recipes now has also been moved to my main page. So I have my recipes being defined here. I think previously I had them defined inside my recipe list here at the top, but now I'm passing it into recipe props. So you can see here I have a recipes variable, which is an array of recipes, and I have a set recipes, which is just that React dispatch set state action. So it's an event handler for set state. So when I want to set my recipes now, I can just call it like I would normally set recipes with the data passed in. Now this is passing it on to my parent component because I'm passing it into my child. So if I go to my app TSX, you can see here I have the set recipes here, and I'm passing it into my recipes UI here. Now one thing as well I want to call out, in my app, I have a pages component, or I have a pages folder in my components. So the pages kind of holds all my main UIs. So I have a landing UI, as I mentioned. I have a my recipes UI, and I have a not found UI, which is the one that shows the image. And then lastly, I have a recipes UI. So I've got 2 recipes UI. Now you might be wondering, why do I have 2? What's the purpose of having 2 here? Now, if I were to go to the UI and kind of show back to the main page, if I click on recipes, this is what I've already kind of shown all you guys this page, right? So you have recipes, you can search them, you can filter them, etc. Right? Now, if I favorite a recipe, right, and I go to my saved recipes, then now it shows up here as a saved recipe. I don't have and notice at the top as well, I don't have those filters anymore. Those filters are gone. So I've made it now so my 2 pages are individual pages separate from each other, and they both have their own data being passed into it. So if I go to my recipes again, I have all the individual recipes here loaded up, as I would normally. Then if I go to my saved one, I just have the one. So I'll kind of show how that works in just a second. If I want to add a couple more to my save just to kind of get some more data in there, I'll do that. I got a few more. All right, so now if I go back to my code just to kind of show what's happening here, in my app TSX, I have a path to recipes, which is my top section here. And then I have a defined index route. So index is saying if I load up this UI or this path recipes, and I don't pass in any other parameters or any other child paths to it, then load up this element. So I have the element defined inside the element tag here, where I'm defining recipes, which is my recipes page here. And this is similar to the page I'd shown last class for the recipes. The only difference here now is I'm passing the data in through the event handlers here. Oh, my cat's on the back of my chair right now. Can you lie down? Okay. All right. So carrying on. As I mentioned, my UI has an input and a select on it, along with the kind of count of the results there. But if I go to my recipes page, I just have a thing that loads up and says recipe list. So if I go back to my recipes and just go saved, you can see here I don't have any of those those individual bits there. So if I remove all my saved recipes now, I get a message saying you have no recipes saved, view all recipes, right? So if I go back here, you can see that's where I'm getting this from. I have a conditional here, so it's checking to see if recipes.length is 0. So if I have no recipes, then show me the no recipes found message, which is being loaded in here. So it has a scan, no recipes saved, and then from there it links you to the recipes saying view all recipes. So if I click on view all, it brings me back to the recipes page where I can save them individually. Now if I save one and go back, it's not going to show that message anymore because I have it so that message only shows when you have none. So if I go back, there we go, and I'll save one more just to kind of drive that home. But that's generally how this works. That's why my recipes page is separate from my recipes page, because I want to show different UIs for each one and different data for each one, depending on what's happening, right? Does anyone have any questions about any of that so far, or anything that's confusing that I should clarify or go back to cover again? Just want to make sure I'm not going too fast over all this or kind of brushing over anything. All right, well, if no one has any questions, I'm going to continue moving on. Please reach out if you have any questions. I encourage you guys to ask questions and reach out. I'd like you guys to ask me questions just because it helps me know that I'm asking or I'm teaching the right things so I can get the right answers and stuff. So one thing also I have added to my UI that I didn't mention is I've also added a recipe saved variable to my mock recipes. So each of my mock recipes now has a recipe saved Boolean on it as a flag. Now, one caveat with this is that these aren't persistent. So if I add like 4 recipes to my saved here and go to my saved recipes here, I've got like 3 here or 2. Now if I refresh, they're not going to be there because there's nothing saving these on my actual local storage or anything. So just keep that in mind. There's no database still. This is all just using temporary dynamic data that doesn't refresh correctly. So once we get a database in here, I'll actually be able to hook it up more and save it properly. But right now, this is kind of the best I can go without a database. So that's kind of how you'd use a React router. And just to kind of illustrate those child routes one more time, just to drive that home. If I go to my routes here for my recipes, it loads up recipes. And if I go to my saved recipes, it's going to load up a child route under that. So my recipes under recipes. And that's because I've defined it in my app TSX here. So if there's a path that isn't the index path, it's going to load up this one instead, which is my recipes. So if I have, and this is under this route, because this route is wrapping these two routes, right? So I have two routes under my main route here, and you can keep nesting these. I could nest another route. If I didn't have a closing tag like this and I actually made a proper closing tag on my recipes, I could nest another route inside my recipes and keep nesting them and keep nesting over and over and over. So you can kind of go crazy with the nesting, and you can keep nesting them into infinity pretty much. Obviously, you don't want to do that, but it's something just to keep in mind. Something else I wanted to cover, that's kind of the main React router stuff. If you have any questions, reach out. That's kind of all I really had for the React router. And I encourage you guys to take a look at my GitHub for this. I put it all on my GitHub. Right now it's in a branch, but I'm going to be merging it back in a second. And also the documentation here, I'll send this in the chat so everyone can take a look. But you'll need to use React Router on the lab, I believe, and on these next milestone for the assignment. So you'll need to get familiar with this at some point. So I encourage you guys to add this sooner rather than later. But you don't want to add it for sprint one. For sprint one, you want to try and cap off what you're doing and make everything in a good state. So for sprint one, as I kind of mentioned, today's class is mostly going to be a class where everyone can kind of merge their code together and get everything into the correct branch for marking. Sprint one, or the sprint review, is going to be due tomorrow. So you have to hand in your code, or not really hand anything in, but if you want, you can submit your code or submit your GitHub URL in the Dropbox here. And I'll pull that up just right now. So in the Dropbox, there's a sprint review one here, or sprint review one, due on September 21st, as well as sprint one interview. Sprint one interview, I've already done it with all of you, so don't worry about that right now. But the sprint retrospective and the sprint review are both going to be due. So make sure you hand those in. I believe they're due on Sunday. So you'll have to hand all these in by Sunday, the sprint review and the sprint retrospective. So for the retrospective, I've kind of mentioned this already, but I'm just going to mention it again just to make it very clear to people, because I don't want anyone asking me questions about things I've already gone over. But I have to pull up the notes because I don't have them open. So in the notes, if you're confused about retrospective and you haven't read over this document, please read over this document. If you ask me questions about this document, I'm just going to tell you to read it over because I'm tired of answering questions about this document. So for the retrospective, you're going to be answering these 3 questions in a Markdown file or a Word document. I don't really care what format. It mentions short Markdown here. I don't care if it's a Markdown or a Word file or whatever. It just needs to be a text file so I can open it. So as long as it's a text file, that's fine. And it mentions here as well, you should be giving at least 2 to 3 points for each individual section. So you should have 2 to 3 sentences